the biggest buck I've ever taken. It was a big 8-point, and I couldn't, because of work, I couldn't get down to my folks to hunt that year or even scout. I had 3 days to hunt. And I took all of those years of scouting and tracking and shooting, and I realized afterwards I compressed them into this 3 days I had on this guy's property in between the 2 shotgun seasons that opened and closed in Ottawa Carleton, because it's shotgun muzzleloader only there. There's no rifles. And they would do a lot of drives, of course, right? Because they didn't have time. It seems to be open. The guys would just drive deer everywhere.
Yeah.
And they had missed this buck several times. I didn't know that until afterwards. I had a guy actually walk into a tree after I hit this deer, shot this deer and brought it out. The guy's property owner's friend walked right into a tree, looking at the little recurve I had. It was the Mamba over here I've got. But I had 3 hours to scout and 3 days to hunt. And I shot the deer. I scouted 3 hours, figured an ingress point, the best convergence, looked at where they put their tree stands for the shotgun, and they were hunting crossbows too after that season was going to end. I realized it was my only chance. And the deer would go out into the soybean fields and feed at night. And then they would come back, of course, being crepuscular animals, they would come back into the beds, in the morning, as you know.
Yeah.
And I got in this horrible beaver swamp mess on a little rise. And as the light came up, and I say it in the story, this huge plume of black ducks and mallards went up from the fields, and there was a little creek in between me and them. And I could see this thing come across the field like it had a crown on its head, walking really slowly. 35 minutes, I watched that deer come into me. And I went through a lot of emotions in that 35 or so minutes, realizing like, this is the only shot you're going to get at this guy in here, or a deer here, in 3 days. This is it for the whole season. That was the biggest thing for me. And I shot him on the ground at 18, 20 yards, maybe. Awesome. When he finally came in. And I had to really do a lot of breathing and self-control when he came in. Yeah, he was 252 dressed.
That's
deer.
A big boy. That's a huge
big boy.
Oh,
I dragged him out myself a quarter of a mile, and I that was all I had because it was marsh. And I went and got the landowner. He was a sergeant with the Ottawa Police here. And he's like, "Oh, I'll help you. You can't drag a deer out yourself." And then he came out and saw which one I'd taken. And they'd seen him, of course. And he was like looking at the deer, and he'd look at my bow. And he'd look at the deer, and he'd look at the bow. And the Mamba's pretty, it's a little 58-inch recurve. And he's like, "You got that big buck with that little thing?" I'm like, yeah, I did. So we took it back to his place and threw it got in his truck, struggled both of us to get it in. It was big deer. And his best friend, who had been shotgun hunting the week before, walked over, and he was the one that walked. He looked at my bow and looked at the deer and walked straight into a little maple and tuned his head pretty good off the tree. He still couldn't believe it. He's like, "You look at the hole on that." He couldn't believe the exit wound and the entry wound. And they're big. I shoot big Zwickey Black Diamonds, deltas off. There's a pretty big broadhead, as you know. It's a pretty big hole. He's like, "You shot that with a slug." I'm like, no, it's right here. And I had the arrow and everything, and I showed him and trying to talk to him about it. He was in utter disbelief. I can't believe that little stick, that little thing, killed that buck. I'm like, well,